She leaned forward and let out a powerful scream into the guard's ear. The crowd gasped, birds scattered in panic. But the guard did not remain silent. He stepped forward, his rifle striking the pavement with a loud thud, and his voice boomed like thunder. "Stand back!" Karen stumbled back, and a second later, something happened that no one expected. London, Buckingham Palace. The square in front of the massive black gates, adorned with golden crests, was swarming with tourists. Some were taking selfies, others filming videos, while a few gazed in admiration at the monumental building that held the secrets of royal life behind its grand facade. But, as always, the guards drew the most attention. A tall, fair-skinned man stood at his post, dressed in a flawlessly pressed red tunic with gold buttons and neatly fitted black trousers. His towering bearskin hat concealed his forehead, and his face remained utterly still, not a flicker of emotion, not a hint of irritation. He was the embodiment of discipline and military composure. People took photos of him but kept a respectful distance, understanding the unspoken rules. But among them was one woman who chose to ignore those rules. Karen. A very overweight, loud American woman in her mid-40s squeezed into a bright pink tracksuit that clung to her massive frame like an overstuffed sausage casing. Her round, sweaty face glistened under the sun, her breathing heavy from the long walk. But she wasn't about to stop. Her small, deep-set eyes locked onto the motionless guard with irritation. "What? Not even gonna blink?" she bellowed, her voice echoing through the square, startling the people around her. A murmur swept through the crowd. Some tourists frowned. Others quickly pulled out their phones. These kinds of moments had a way of becoming an internet sensation. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She took a bold step forward. Her massive body loomed close, so close that her stomach nearly pressed against the guard's uniform. He did not flinch. He did not blink. He gave no sign that he even noticed her presence. Karen narrowed her eyes. "What are you, a robot?" she sneered, tilting her head. The guard remained silent. The crowd held its breath. Someone was already recording. Karen wasn't done. She leaned in, closer, even closer, until her face was inches from the guard's ear. And then, taking a deep breath, she screamed at full force into his ear. The sound was so deafening that people instinctively covered their ears. Some jerked back in shock. Even the birds, perched peacefully atop the palace roof, scattered into the air in panic. But what would happen next? The crowd froze. Karen's scream ripped through the air like an emergency siren. It was ear-piercing, sharp and violent, like shattering glass in the dead of silence. Her voice, dripping with mockery and arrogance, shook the square, echoing through the open space and making people flinch. "What the hell?" a man in a gray blazer yelped, covering his ears. "Dear God, is she insane?" A proper British woman in an elegant hat hissed in disgust, stepping back. People stood frozen. Some instinctively backed away, as if from an impact. Parents hurriedly covered their children's ears, while those closest to Karen grimaced in visible annoyance. Several tourists glared at her in irritation, while others hurriedly pulled out their phones, sensing that something big was about to unfold. And then, a sudden burst of wings. The pigeons that had been calmly perched on the palace rooftops suddenly exploded into the air, their black silhouettes filling the sky in a flurry of chaotic motion. Everything seemed to freeze. Everything, except the guard. He did not flinch. He did not waver. He did not blink. But something had changed. Before, his stance had been calm, composed, routine. Now his stillness was menacing. A subtle tension had crept into his body, like a coiled spring, wound impossibly tight. And in his previously blank eyes, there was now something else. And then, suddenly, his hand moved. The crowd gasped. The guard, who just moments ago had been nothing more than part of the scenery, came to life. He stepped forward. His black polished boots struck the stone pavement with a thunderous impact. Bang! His rifle slammed against the ground, the metallic crash reverberating through the square. And then, it happened. His voice erupted like a thunderclap. "Stand back!" His booming command shattered the air. It was deep, sharp, and ice-cold. Not a whisper of hesitation, not a flicker of doubt. It ripped through the space, a voice of authority, discipline, and absolute power. The crowd collectively gasped. Someone screamed. Some stumbled backward instinctively. The tourists, who had been gleefully recording, were now standing motionless, mouths hanging open, too stunned to even press record. And at the center of it all, Karen. She froze. Just seconds ago, her face had been smug, her lips curled into a mocking smirk. But now, her face drained of color. She blinked, and in her eyes, something new flickered. Not fear, but something very, very close. The guard stepped forward again. This step wasn't rushed, but it was heavy, firm, filled with absolute resolve. His polished black boot struck the stone pavement, sending a deep, commanding echo through the square. Now he towered over Karen, tall, unyielding, his posture cold, disciplined, and impeccable. His red tunic seemed even brighter, contrasting against the gray stone of the palace. His massive bearskin hat made him appear even more formidable. He didn't just look like a soldier. He was one, powerful, intimidating, unbreakable. His hands gripped his rifle tightly, and his eyes, once devoid of emotion, now pierced through Karen with an icy, penetrating stare. And when he spoke, his voice wasn't a scream. It was a command. "Do not approach me!" His words were sharp, firm, delivered with military precision. There was no room for argument. His voice thundered across the crowd, making the very air feel heavier. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't warning. He was commanding. The crowd erupted into applause. The clapping was loud, powerful, approving. It was support, admiration, pure excitement. "Oh, wow! Bravo!" someone shouted. "That's how you handle them!" "Best day of my life!" another voice cheered, filled with exhilaration. People smiled, laughed, threw their hands in the air, as if they had just witnessed the final round of a knockout fight. But the most important reaction was Karen's. She stumbled back. A second ago, she had felt in control. Now, her confidence was gone. Her eyes widened, her lips twitched, but she couldn't force her usual smug smirk. She took a step back and immediately tripped over her own foot. Her massive body wobbled. Her arms flailed wildly in the air, desperately trying to catch her balance. But it was too late. With a dull, heavy thud, Karen crashed onto the stone pavement. Her body trembled on impact, and for a brief moment, there was silence. Then, a short, sharp scream pierced the air. Not a scream of pain, a scream of shock. Realization. Humiliation. The crowd exploded into laughter. "Oh my God! I can't breathe!" someone gasped, wiping away tears from laughing too hard. "Somebody rewind that! I need to see it again!" Phones were already recording. Some people were holding their stomachs from laughing too hard. Others were literally crying from joy. But Karen... She groaned loudly, rolling onto her side. Her hands scraped against the stone, struggling to find leverage. But her massive frame made it impossible to get up quickly. Her face was red, not just from effort, from shame. She didn't fully comprehend what had just happened. She didn't yet realize how drastically the crowd's attitude had changed. But one thing was clear. Her fun was over. Karen breathed heavily, her massive body still trembling from the adrenaline. Her cheeks burned. Her forehead glistened with sweat. Her chest heaved up and down. Whether from exhaustion or pure rage was unclear. Her face no longer held arrogance or smug satisfaction. It was now bright red, from humiliation, anger, and the painful realization that nothing had gone the way she expected. She jerked upright, one hand pressing against the pavement, the other flailing in the air as if grasping at something invisible. Her broad shoulders tensed as she struggled to roll over. "What? Me? I was just checking if he was even alive." Her voice was shrill, piercing, shaking with indignation. For one brief second, the crowd was silent. And then, a wave of murmurs. People's faces were filled with skepticism. Some glanced at each other, some snorted. Others wrinkled their noses in disgust. But the most crushing part? No one stood up for her. Not one single voice spoke in her defense. The only person who responded was a royal security officer. Tall, fit, dressed in a sharp black uniform, he stood with perfect posture, gazing down at her with calm authority. There was no irritation on his face, no disdain, not even curiosity. Only discipline, strictness, unshakable composure. And that made his presence even more terrifying. He didn't shout, he didn't look annoyed, he didn't even change his expression. He simply gave a small nod to the guards standing at his sides. "Please, come with us." His voice was calm, but within that calmness was absolute power. Two security guards stepped forward. Broad-shouldered, strong, dressed in sharp suits, they moved without hesitation, grabbing Karen firmly by the arms and lifting her up. Her body jerked. She whipped her head around, her blonde hair sticking to her sweaty forehead, her breathing erratic. But at that moment, the sound of the crowd drowned her out. The crowd erupted into applause, loud, long, triumphant. The claps were strong, real, approving. They weren't for her. They were against her. "Oh, she's done for!" someone shouted. "Best day in Buckingham Palace history!" another voice cheered. Karen froze. Her eyes widened. She whipped her head toward the crowd. "You're all crazy! I'm from America! You can't arrest me!" She spat the words out, her face contorted with fury. But no one in the crowd looked afraid. No one reacted the way she expected. Instead, someone laughed. Someone mocked her in a high-pitched voice. "Oh, I'm from America. So what?" The crowd howled with laughter. Karen was fuming. She struggled again, but the guards held her tight, preventing her from moving. And then, the officer slowly turned his head to her. His gray eyes were cold, emotionless, and he spoke, his voice calm, steady, yet sharper than any scream. "But you're in Britain, ma'am, and we have rules too." The crowd erupted into cheers, loud, triumphant, overjoyed. Someone whistled. Someone shouted, "Perfect response!" Karen swallowed hard. Her body tensed. She wanted to say something else, but it was too late. She had lost. The video went viral like wildfire. The footage, recorded just seconds earlier, of Karen leaning in, screaming into the guard's ear, spread across social media at lightning speed. Then, with the precision of a military machine, the guard took a sharp step forward, slammed his rifle against the pavement, and issued his thunderous command. That moment became an internet sensation. People across the globe watched in awe and exhilaration. Thousands of comments flooded TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Everywhere on the internet, people were talking about this perfect display of British military discipline. News headlines and social media posts exploded. Karen versus the Royal Guard, a moment you'll watch over and over again. She thought she could get away with it, but she was so wrong. This is what happens when you cross the line in a foreign country. The comments were unfiltered. This is legendary. I swear I could watch this 1,000 times and never get tired of it. The guard is a man of steel. Absolute unit. Social media editors. Wasted no time. Someone remixed her scream into a heavy bass drop, syncing the guard's command perfectly to the beat. Someone slowed down her fall, adding dramatic Hollywood-style music. Someone simply captioned it, "Karen versus the British Army, the winner is obvious." By the next day, news sites were running with it. An American tourist tested the guard's patience and got an instant response. When you think you can do anything, but then meet British discipline. The power of tradition, how one step from a royal guard put an entitled tourist in her place. Memes took over the internet. Her screaming face, followed by the guard's epic response, became the ultimate symbol of instant karma. Everyone was talking about it. The clip made it to morning talk shows, where commentators seriously analyzed the importance of discipline and respect. YouTubers made parodies, reenacting the scene in a comedic style. But most of all, the video changed Karen's life forever. No matter how much she wished to move on, she could no longer escape the consequences of her actions. That day was forever etched in history, and the internet